4 on Leviticus.
At the start of this week, I was a bit ill and spent a day on the settee watching daytime telly. Woohoo. Thank the Lord for Netflix, that's all I can say. And Iron Fist, how cool is that? If you've not started watching it, watch it, it's very cool. But anyway, the reason I say that, not just as an advert, I don't know, get some church sponsorship, Oak Tree sponsored by Netflix. Great idea. I wanted to mention that because on Wednesday and Thursday this week, the staff team and I were at the New Wine Leaders Conference, and we had a great time there, worshipping with the leaders from all over London and the southeast, and listening to some teaching. And also I had an opportunity, I was sat on a train for an hour with Mark Aldrich, which was fantastic. He sends his regards, and we spent an hour talking about you. Which was fantastic. But he says hello, and he hopes you're all well, but it was fantastic. Really good time. And yeah, so there we go. Anyway, we are looking at Leviticus 4, but the first few weeks, there's still a few of the little booklets left at the back, if you want to play catch-up and do a bit of reading there at the back on the table. If not, there's some notes here. You can look at Leviticus 1, we looked at in the first week, and we had the phrase sin, sacrifice, and smile. The idea that God has called us to be a priesthood, a holy nation, set apart, special for him. But this was such a big ask, and sin was a problem. But sacrifice was the solution, and through this sacrifice, it brought about a smile to his face. Not that he likes the smell of burning lamb, but actually through that sacrifice, he could smell and see and draw near to us, and we could draw near to him. We then had week 2. We looked at how the ancient Near East expectation on other religions for sacrifices started off really quite small and went up and up and up and up. And I don't think I was the only one who was disappointed when Ruth didn't pull out a small child from under the table and placed it on top. But there was that kind of generic expectation in all the other religions at the time, but actually not in this one. And there was this grain offering, this idea that this bread made at the center of the house was something that was there thanking God for what he had done, to give thanks and breaking the bread regularly. This idea that stream that went through, this thread going all the way through the Bible, that when bread was broken, thanks was given. All the way through the New Testament, with Jesus breaking bread and giving thanks, all the way through we can find that thread. And then last week, we had the peace offering, shalom. It's more than just shalom as in peace, as in no war. Shalom as in peace with yourself. Shalom as in peace with your community. Shalom as in peace with your environment. It's a wholesale peace offering that God has called us to be and to do. And the wonderful thing was that when we're called to give this peace offering, it isn't just something that they kind of throw on the pyre and it's done. It's actually the best bits are given to God, the fatty bits, the most tasty bits. They're given to God. The rest of it, we get to share. This peace we share with others. And then all the way through the Bible, in the same way we have breaking of bread and giving thanks, all the way through the Bible we have peace, we also have grace. Grace and peace. Nearly all the letters that come after the Gospels come with the welcome of grace and peace to you. Grace and peace to you. Grace and peace to you. This idea that through grace it frees up space in our lives to peace to reside. Grace and peace to be shared. So that's the first 3 chapters, and now we're looking at Leviticus chapter 4 on page 104. We're not going to read all of it. We're going to read the first 12 verses, and then we're going to look at different bits that flow out of that. But if you can turn to page 104, there's Bibles on the tables that are around, just so you can prove I'm not making it up. Leviticus chapter 4, beginning to read at verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, when anyone sins unintentionally and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, if the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people, he must bring to the Lord a young bull without defect as a sin offering for the sin he has committed. He is to present the bull at the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord. He is to lay his hands on its head and slaughter it before the Lord. Then the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and carry it into the tent of meeting. He is to dip the finger into the blood and sprinkle it over 7 times before the Lord in front of the curtain of the sanctuary. The priest shall then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense, and this is before the Lord at the tent of meeting. The rest of the bull's blood he shall pour out on the base of the altar of the burnt offerings at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He shall remove all the fat from the bull of the sin offering, the fat that covers the inner parts or is connected to them, both kidneys with the fat on them near the loins and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys, just as the fat is removed from the ox sacrificed at the fellowship offering. Then the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offering. But the hide of the bull and its flesh, as well as the head, the legs, the inner parts, and the offal, that is, all the rest of the bull, he must take outside the camp to a place ceremonially clean, where the ashes are thrown and burnt with wood in a wood fire on an ash heap. So, it's not just the priests who are expected to do this. It kind of goes through on a scale all the way through, starting with the priests, going through to the Israelite community sinning unintentionally, leaders in the community sinning unintentionally, members of the wider community sinning unintentionally. It goes all the way through, starting with the priests, all the way down to basically just everybody. If there's an unintentional sin, it's got to be dealt with. Which seems slightly harsh on first reading, that it's unintentional. I didn't mean it. I didn't know it was wrong. And apparently in law, that's no defense today. But I didn't know it was no. Well, it's the way my wife drives a car anyway. But no, it's I never drive the car nowadays. It's not my fault. And but the idea is that isn't the defense, but it goes through that there's unintentional sin. So what's the problem? The Hebrew word that is used in this is chatahar. That is it's like an archery term. You aim to do well, but the arrow falls short. You want to start to do well, but always it just kind of thunk, it hits the ground. It doesn't hit the target. I want to do the right thing, but the situation I'm in makes me fall short. I can't help it, but I always seem to miss the mark. Chatahar, sin where you aim to do the right thing, but it falls short. As we've just read, it starts with a priestly thing. The expectation is a young bull. The whole community, again, a young bull. If it's a leader, it's got to be a male goat. If it's a community member, it's a female. I like the idea that the higher up the community are, the bigger the expectation of the sacrifice. That leaders, more will be expected of you. More will be expected of you for this unintentional sin. It goes on. This sin is widened. If you look into chapter 5, this carries on. It's a weird one, this. They don't divvy up the chapter brilliantly in this. But if you look at chapter 5, it's a continuation of this particular sin offering sacrifice. If a person sins because he does not speak up when he hears a public charge to testify regarding something he has seen or learned about, he will be held responsible. So if you don't shout up for somebody where something's going wrong and you should have done, this is that same category of sin. If you read on again, or if a person, in verse 2, chapter 5, or if a person touches anything ceremonially unclean, whether the carcass of an unclean wild animals or an unclean livestock or unclean creature that move along the ground, or even is unaware of it, he has become ceremonially unclean and is guilty. Chatahar, this unintentional sin that is something that falls short, but is something that you inadvertently touch and become unclean. You aim to do good, but you fall short, whether it's your fault or not. Now let's take this understanding of sin, let's drag it out of Leviticus into the New Testament, and let's look at Matthew chapter 9. On page 974. Hold that definition of sin in your mind while we read this passage. Matthew chapter 9, begin to read at verse 18. While he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said, "your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed at that very moment. Let's just read the parallel reading of that in Luke's Gospel. Just flick to Luke chapter 8 on page 1038. Beginning to read the second half of verse 42. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." So, we have this Levitical understanding of sin in Leviticus chapter 4, of unintentional sin, of sin that you don't shout up for someone, or sin where you touch something, sometimes inadvertently, that makes you ceremonially unclean. And we have this episode of a woman who's bleeding touching Jesus. Why did Jesus say in verse 22 and 48 in both those readings, "Your faith has healed you"? Why faith? And why did she want to touch his cloak? We have this definition of sin, of an intentional sin, of touching something, becoming unclean. And then we have the phrase in the Luke reading halfway through of Jesus saying, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Why do we have that? Why do we have those questions? Why do we have this woman wanting to touch the edge of his cloak? The edge or the fringe that the gospel writers are referring to are from, come on then, what's this called? A tallit, a prayer shawl. You come and have a look at it later. I've put it on top of the communion table because I think it's quite significant we're doing communion today. And it's a prayer shawl that rabbis and devout Jews wear on certain days. Some of them wear them all the time. If you go up through, is it Bethnal Green that's quite a large Jewish area now, isn't it? And you can see them kind of poking out from under the jackets quite a lot. And these tassels that are called, I can never say it, tzitzits that hang out of the bottom. There's a certain representation between each one, and it's quite significant in this story, knowing all that goes on. You have the corners themselves called tzitzits, and the actual corners of this garment are called the kanap. Each of these things are significant to the fuller understanding of what's going on. We have the definition of sin, of chetahar, this idea of falling short, of unintentionality, of becoming unclean. And we have a woman who has been unclean for 12 years, who would not be able to go and worship in the temple, who would be shunned by a family, who wouldn't be touched by anybody, who when she revealed her ailment and what has happened in a crowd, can you imagine everybody just taking a step back from this woman? Because the focus of the whole of this Levitical understanding of cleanliness is that she is the worst of the unclean. And this power had gone from Jesus. The key to understanding all this fully is in Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, page 962. This is almost the last verses written of the Old Testament, page 962. And this is one of those last bits of the Old Testament that prophesies about this Messiah that is going to come and how distinctive he is and what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. And these wonderful words are written in Malachi chapter 4, starting to read at verse 1. Surely the day is coming. It will burn like a furnace. All the arrogant and every evildoer will be stubble, and that day that is coming will set them on fire, says the Lord God Almighty. Not a root or a branch will be left to them. But for you who revere my name, and this is the prophecy, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings, and you will go out and leap like calves released from the stall. But for you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. The wings that they're referring to are the canap. That's the word that's used. The corner of this prayer shawl. Healing in the corners. Healing in his wings. It's the same word used when they describe the feathers on a bird. Healing in his wings, the canap, the fringe of his garments. This prophecy of a Messiah coming, this Son of Righteousness. This is words used for the Messiah. He will have healings in his corner of his garments. Why the tassels? Why did she want to touch the fringe? Because she knew her Bible. That was the faith that Jesus was referring to. Your faith has healed you. She knew this Messiah that was walking past could heal her, that he had healing in the corner of his garments. Even the sins that are unintentional, Jesus can cleanse. Even the sins that aren't our fault, Jesus can cleanse. Even the damage done by others, Jesus can cleanse. Even the stuff we don't realize we're doing wrong, Jesus can cleanse. Up until then, she spent 12 years literally out in the wilderness, not being able to worship, not being able to be accepted by her family, not being able to be held by a brother or a lover out of fear of being seen as unclean. I love that idea, the phrase that Jesus uses when he says, the power has gone from me. The idea that we kind of read it and go, the power's gone from it, almost like he's kind of, the battery of healing had been discharged and he was empty. No, the power had gone from him into her and actually made her holy and clean and welcome in a family again. I think that's why into to be able to go and worship in the temple again. This woman for 12 years not being able to do any of that, now being able to be held again, to have an arm around her, to be hugged. This unintentional sin, the sin we don't realize, that Jesus can heal, this chataha, that Jesus can take and make us a daughter and a son again, belonging to this family of God. Let's just bow our heads. make us whole again. Father, if there's any of us feeling like there's a bit in our lives, that, however unintentional, that is affecting our relationship with you, I said, Lord, that you'll take it. Make us your sons and daughters again. In Jesus' name, amen.